Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so today we're digging into something really fascinating, a real puzzle in the energy market. It's one of those things that, when you first look at it, seems totally contradictory. Just think about it. After that terrible Fukushima disaster back in 2011, it felt like, well, a lot of the world, especially big Western countries, really started getting cold feet about nuclear energy.
Right. The consensus seemed to shift, didn't it? Public opinion got very wary.
Exactly. And new reactor projects, they pretty much sold out. So logically, you'd expect the price of uranium, the fuel for these plants, to drop.
And it did, massively. We saw it go from, what, about $75 a pound?
Yeah, around there. And it just plummeted down to maybe $20, $30 a pound. And it stayed there for like almost 10 years.
Just stuck in the doldrums.
It really felt like a forgotten commodity, an industry maybe heading for a slow fade. But then things started to get really weird around 2020.
Weird is a good word for it. Baffling, maybe.
Because uranium prices didn't just edge back up. They exploded. They surged like crazy. Today, we're talking prices way over $80 a pound. That's not just back to where they were before Fukushima. It's way past that.
Significantly higher, yeah.
But here's the kicker, right? This huge rebound isn't really being driven by the US or France suddenly deciding to build tons of new reactors. That's not happening on a grand scale.
No, not really. New builds are still pretty few and far between in the West.
So the question just hangs there, doesn't it? What on earth is going on? Who's buying all this uranium, pushing the price up so aggressively?
Yeah.
And, why?
And that's where this deep dive really takes focus.
Yeah.
Because when you start peeling back the layers, the answer consistently points towards one massive player on the global stage. China.
Right.
This isn't just, a simple story about supply and demand for a raw material. It's much more profound. It's a window into China's really quiet but incredibly aggressive long-term strategy.
Strategy for uranium.
For uranium, yes, but also for dominating the entire nuclear energy sector. It's about their massive, meticulously planned ambition there. And what we're going to unpack is that this isn't just about needing more electricity, though that's part of it.
Right.
It's actually a multi-layered strategic masterclass. It touches on geopolitics, controlling resources, aiming for technological leadership. It'd have huge global implications. So by the end of our chat today, you'll hopefully have a much clearer picture of not just this specific energy story, but also how these sort of under-the-radar moves are fundamentally shifting global power dynamics.
Okay, that sounds critical. So to really get our heads around this, maybe we should rewind a bit. Back to 2011.
Yeah, back to Fukushima.
Right. I think most people remember those awful images from Japan. The massive earthquake, that devastating tsunami.
Unbelievable destruction.
And then the cascade of failures at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, the meltdowns, the radiation leaks. It just sent this wave of fear, genuine fear, around the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a local disaster. It had global repercussions for the perception of nuclear safety.
It really did. And the reaction from countries that relied heavily on nuclear power was pretty immediate and in some cases really drastic.
Germany comes to mind straight away.
Yeah, Germany famously decided, right, that's it, and accelerated their plan to phase out nuclear power completely. Their energy vend, they shut down reactors, even ones that had been running for ages.
And Japan itself obviously shut down all its commercial reactors initially. Some have come back online since, but it was a huge disruption.
Even in places like the US and France, countries with big nuclear programs, plans for new reactors got put on hold or slowed right down. Public opinion turned quite strongly against it in many places.
It was definitely a moment of global reckoning for the industry. People were seriously questioning if the risks were worth the rewards. The whole future felt uncertain.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Widespread fear, a pullback from nuclear.
And the economic consequences followed pretty directly, as you'd expect. With fewer countries planning new reactors or even shutting down existing ones, the demand for uranium fuel it collapsed.
Right.
So that price drop we mentioned, from $75 down to that $20, $30 range, that wasn't just a blip. It lasted for years.
A long time. Must have been brutal for the miners.
Oh, absolutely devastating. Exploration stopped. Existing mines cut back production. Some just closed altogether.
Yeah.
Investment in finding new uranium sources basically dried up. Why would you invest when the price was so low?
Makes sense.
So yeah, for a good chunk of the 2010s, uranium was just off the radar for most policymakers, for most investors. The feeling was that the big nuclear boom was over, maybe even reversing.
So investing in the fuel seemed pointless.
Pretty much like a fool's errand, yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to sink huge amounts of capital into opening new mines in that environment. And this underinvestment, this lack of planning for any future rebound, that actually set the stage for the supply issues and the price surge we're seeing now.
Yeah.
Because nobody was preparing for demand to suddenly pick back up.
Okay, that context is absolutely crucial because now we get to that twist, that really surprising part of the story.
The big reversal.
Exactly. Despite many Western countries still being pretty hesitant about building lots of new nuclear plants, uranium prices started climbing back around 2020. And not just climbing, but soaring.
Yeah, blowing past those old pre-Fukushima highs.
Yeah.
We're now firmly above $80 a pound. It's a massive shift in the market.
A huge shift. And like we said, it's happening without a sudden rush of new reactor construction in the US or Europe driving it.
Right. That's the puzzling part.
So it forces the question again. Who is buying? Who's creating this demand?
And the evidence, all the market signals, they all point squarely at China.
China. Okay.
Yeah. Various sources, industry insiders, they show China has been quietly, but very, very intensely, just buying up huge amounts of uranium on the global market.
Quietly but intensely.
Their buying has been so significant, so strategic, that big Western uranium producers like Cameco, for example, have actually publicly warned about it. They're saying China is effectively cornering large chunks of the global supply.
Wow. So they're worried there won't be enough left for others.
That's the concern being raised, yeah. that China's moves are making it harder and more expensive for other countries to secure their own future supplies.
Which brings us right back to that paradox. China already has significant domestic uranium reserves, right? We know that.
They do. They invested heavily in finding more domestically.
So why are they buying so aggressively on the international market, pushing up prices for everyone, including themselves, potentially? Has to be more to it.
Absolutely. There's definitely a deeper strategy unfolding here. And to really get it, we need to understand the sheer scale of China's energy needs. Think about the incredible economic growth China's experienced over the last, say, 30, 40 years, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, becoming this global manufacturing hub.
The factory of the world.
Exactly. None of that would have been possible without energy. Massive amounts of energy. And crucially, it needed to be stable, reliable, and perhaps most importantly, incredibly cheap.
Right, cheap energy fuels industrial growth.
Precisely. But here's the vulnerability China faced early on. They don't have huge domestic reserves of oil or natural gas. Not like Russia or the Middle East.
Okay, a key difference.
And back when their rapid development really kicked off, they just didn't have the money, the foreign currency, to import all the oil and gas they needed on the scale required.
So they were vulnerable.
Very. This energy insecurity, this lack of easy domestic options, really shaped their whole approach to energy strategy from the get-go. It forced them to look hard for alternatives they could control.
Which leads us to coal, doesn't it?
It does. In those early phases of industrialization, with limited options for huge-scale baseload power, coal became the workhorse, the absolute engine of their economic miracle.
And the scale was just unbelievable.
Mind-boggling. Between roughly 1992 and 2010, that's less than 2 decades, China built nearly 600 coal-fired power plants.
600?
Yeah, just wrap your head around that. It's the biggest, fastest expansion of energy infrastructure in human history. Nothing else comes close.
And the impact?
Well, on one hand, it had a massive positive social impact. That coal-fueled energy boom directly helped lift something like 500 million Chinese citizens into the middle class by 2010.
500 million people. That's incredible, creating a huge consumer base.
Absolutely crucial for their economic model. But there was a massive, massive downside.
Pollution.
Exactly. The pollution was devastating. You saw those images, right? Major cities constantly choked in thick, acrid smog.
Yeah, visibility down to almost nothing sometimes. Red alerts for air quality.
People forced indoors, masks becoming just a part of daily life. It wasn't just unpleasant. It caused huge public health problems. Respiratory illnesses soared.
Yeah, it was just unsustainable.
Completely unsustainable. Environmentally, obviously, but also for public health, for social stability. The very thing driving their success was also poisoning their air and making people sick. They knew they had to change course.
Okay, so the coal era had limits, but their energy needs weren't shrinking, were they?
Not at all. Quite the opposite. Even after lifting those 500 million into the middle class, around 2010, 2011, China still had, roughly a third of its population, maybe 400 million people, technically living in poverty.
Still a huge number.
And the national goal, the ambition laid out by the leadership, wasn't just to tread water. It was to bring another 600 million people into the middle class over the next few decades.
Another 600 million. The energy demand for that alone is staggering.
Staggering.
And on top of that, the people who are already middle class, their individual energy use was going up too, naturally, as they bought more appliances, cars, lived more modern lifestyles.
Like consumption grows with income.
To put a number on it, the average person in China today uses around 4,000 kilowatt hours of electricity a year. Think of that as roughly what a typical European home might use, or maybe running a big air conditioner nonstop for half a year.
Okay.
But projections show that climbing to maybe 7,000 kilowatt hours per person per year by 2050.
Almost double.
Yeah. So you combine that rising individual use with the goal of lifting hundreds of millions more people up the economic ladder, plus continued industrial growth. It meant China absolutely needed a monumental shift in energy strategy, away from coal, towards something cleaner, more stable, more secure.
Okay, so they need a new energy source, or mix of sources. Looking back to the early 2000s when they were formulating this long-term plan, what were the key criteria? What did this ideal energy source need to look like for China? Well, number one, as we said, cheap. It had to be incredibly cost-effective to power this enormous, still developing economy.
Non-negotiable, really.
Pretty much. Second, it needed to be stable and sustainable. Guaranteed long-term supply without the ups and downs and geopolitical risks of relying on imported fossil fuels.
Right, security of supply.
Third, environmental performance was becoming critical. They desperately needed something with low emissions to tackle that awful air pollution.
Get away from the smog.
And fourth, maybe the most crucial from their strategic view, it had to be free from external control. They were acutely aware, even back then, that energy could be used as a weapon, a tool of geopolitical leverage. They wanted to minimize that vulnerability.
Cheap, stable, clean, and controllable.
That was the checklist?
So, given that list, why did nuclear energy seem like such a good fit for China at that particular time, especially compared to, say, renewables? Because China's big in renewables now.
They are now, absolutely. China is a world leader in solar and wind deployment today, but we have to remember the context of the early 2000s.
Right, different landscape.
Back then, solar and wind technology just wasn't as mature, wasn't as cheap, and wasn't really seen as viable for providing that massive, constant baseload power needed for heavy industry in huge cities. Grid integration was a much bigger challenge, too.
Okay, so renewables weren't quite ready for prime time on that scale.
Yet not for the scale China envisioned.
No.
Nuclear, on the other hand, offered incredibly dense power, a lot of energy from a small amount of fuel. It offered continuous 20-87 operation, unlike intermittent renewables. It was carbon-free, addressing the pollution issue. And crucially, if they could master the technology and secure the fuel supply domestically or through reliable partners, it offered that path towards energy independence and control they craved.
So it ticked a lot of boxes on their list back then.
It really did, which is why for this deep dive, we're focusing on how nuclear became such a central pillar of their strategy to power the future.
Got it. Now, building nuclear power plants, it's not simple, is it?
Oh, not at all. It's incredibly complex. It's not just about having the money, though you need a lot of that too.
Right.
It takes years, often decades, from planning to operation. You need highly sophisticated technology, specialized engineering skills, a really robust safety and regulatory system, a skilled workforce. It's a massive national undertaking.
An entire ecosystem, really.
Exactly. And China understood this from the start. Their goal wasn't just, let's build a few reactors here and there to help out. No, their ambition was way bigger. It was about systematically building an entire domestic nuclear industry. Self-sufficiency was key.
Not just using the tech, but mastering it.
Mastering it and eventually leading it. That's what's really striking. Their ambition quickly went beyond just buying reactors from France or the US or Russia. They aimed for, and still aim for, outright global leadership in the nuclear sector.
Leadership meaning?
Meaning having the most reactors, yes, but also mastering the manufacturing technology, developing their own advanced reactor designs, owning the intellectual property, and crucially for our discussion today, ensuring total fuel security through massive uranium stockpiles they control.
So it's the whole value chain.
The entire chain. It's a deliberate, long-term strategic play for dominance in what they see as a critical future technology. Not just consumers, but masters of the game.
And the data really shows how differently China acted after Fukushima compared to others, doesn't it?
Starkly different. If you look at the established nuclear players, like the US and France, their nuclear power generation basically stayed flat or even dipped slightly in the years following 2011.
And Japan obviously cut back drastically.
Right. The mood in those countries was caution, maybe cost concerns, maybe a bigger push towards natural gas, renewables at that time.
But China?
China was the complete opposite. In that exact same period, while others paused or retreated, China went into overdrive. Their nuclear energy production increased by an incredible 400%.
400%?
Yes. To put numbers on it, their total nuclear capacity jumped from around 10 gigawatts, which is 10 billion watts, up to 53 gigawatts.
Well,
they now have 55 reactors running, placing them firmly in the top 3 globally for nuclear power generation. This wasn't just a small increase. It was a massive planned acceleration while everyone else was hitting the brakes.
that is a stunning contrast. And they're not stopping there, are they?
Not even close. Their plans for the future are, frankly, audacious. That 53 gigawatts they have now, they're aiming for 400 gigawatts by 2055.
400, that sounds almost impossibly large.
It's colossal. To get there, they plan to build at least 150 new reactors.
150.
Just try to process that number. It's more reactors than all other countries in the world combined have managed to build in the last 35 years.
That puts it in perspective. It's unprecedented.
It really is. And if you look at the big picture, this clearly positions China to become the undisputed global leader in nuclear energy. They're set to overtake the US, which has around 93 reactors and 95 gigawatts currently.
And France?
And France, with its 56 reactors and about 61 gigawatts. Some analysts think China could actually become number 1 globally as early as 2030.
Just 6 years away.
Yeah. And contrast that again. Neither the US nor France has concrete funded plans for anything near that kind of massive expansion. China isn't just playing catch-up. They're aiming to build an insurmountable lead in a technology they deem strategically vital.
Okay, an ambition that huge must have an equally huge cost attached.
Oh, absolutely. Those 150 new reactors, estimates range from about $370 billion up to maybe $440 billion.
Billion with a B. Hundreds of billions.
Staggering sums. But everything suggests China is absolutely committed to spending it. Money doesn't seem to be the main obstacle here. They see it as a necessary investment in their future security and technological standing.
So if money isn't the biggest hurdle, what is?
The fuel, uranium. Securing enough uranium reliably for the long term. That's the single biggest challenge, even more critical than the financing.
Because these plants run for a very long time.
Decades. A typical modern reactor has an operational life of 60, maybe even 80 years. So China doesn't just need uranium for next year. They need guaranteed supplies stretching far into the future.
Okay, so how much do they actually need for this grand plan?
To fuel that massive fleet they envision, reaching 400 gigawatts, estimates suggest China needs to secure at least 1 million tons of uranium by 2050.
1 million tons. How does that compare to, like, global production?
Well, right now, the entire world only mines about 50,000 to 60,000 tons of uranium per year. And that production is concentrated in just a handful of countries: Kazakhstan, Canada, Australia, Namibia.
Okay, so the math doesn't look great just relying on current annual production.
Not at all. Even if China could somehow magically buy all the uranium mined globally each year, which is impossible politically and logistically, it would still take them somewhere between 10 and 20 years just to stockpile what they need for their future fleet.
Which really underlines why they needed a long-term aggressive strategy. They couldn't just rely on the spot market.
Exactly. It highlights the scale of the challenge and why their planning had to be so meticulous and start so early.
And you mentioned they started early.
Remarkably early. This is a key point. They saw this uranium supply crunch coming way back in the early 2000s. Long before most other countries were thinking that far ahead about nuclear fuel strategy.
So they were proactive.
Very proactive. They started working on securing their supply decades ago. Even their early, relatively small-scale buying in the international market back in the early 2000s was enough to contribute to rising prices then, up until about 2008. They were signaling their intentions early on.
Okay, but then prices got really high around 2008. What did they do then?
That was a critical moment. Instead of getting scared off by the high prices on the world market prices they themselves had partly helped inflate, they made a smart strategic pivot. They turned inward.
To their own domestic resources.
Exactly. They launched a massive domestic exploration program, poured hundreds of millions of dollars into geological surveys, drilling, identifying potential uranium deposits within China's own borders.
A big investment.
Huge. And it paid off spectacularly. Their known domestic uranium reserves jumped dramatically. They went from about 77,000 tons initially up to around 265,000 tons by 2012.
Wow, that's a significant increase.
It was a game changer. It meant China suddenly had a substantial internal supply, a strategic reserve they could fall back on. It gave them a foundation of security and more leverage when dealing with the international market later.
Okay, so they boosted their domestic reserves, and then came Fukushima.
Right. And here's where global events, tragic as they were, created this, well, almost perversely lucky opportunity for China's strategy.
How so?
Because the 2008 financial crisis had already put pressure on commodity prices, and then Fukushima in 2011 just sent uranium prices crashing further, as we discussed.
Right, because everyone else got scared off nuclear.
Pretty much. Major nuclear nations paused, scaled back, or abandoned plans. Global demand for uranium tanked, making it incredibly cheap for anyone still in the market.
And China was still in the market.
They were, but they were also smart about it. They didn't just blindly forge ahead. They did pause their own nuclear projects for about a year.
Ah, okay.
They used that time to really study what happened at Fukushima, to review their own safety standards, upgrade their reactor designs and protocols, make sure they learned the lessons.
So a calculated pause, not an abandonment.
Exactly. And then, crucially, after that period of assessment, they hit the accelerator again on their nuclear expansion. Unlike many others who kept the brakes on or reversed course.
Okay, I see the opportunity now.
Yeah. This allowed them to do two things simultaneously. First, they could keep their newly discovered domestic uranium reserves largely in the ground, saving them as a strategic backup for the future, for hard times, as they might see it.
Conserve their own resources.
Right. And second, they could go on an aggressive buying spree internationally, taking advantage of those rock-bottom prices while everyone else was looking away, locking in decades of supply very, very cheaply. It was a masterstroke of timing and strategy, really.
And they had a specific plan for this acquisition, didn't they? You mentioned a one-third strategy.
Yes. Developed around 2011, very comprehensive. It was designed to ensure they weren't too reliant on any single source of uranium. Diversification and control were the key aims.
Okay, so what were the three parts?
The first third, as we just discussed, was designated to come from their own domestic reserves, leveraging those 265,000 tons they'd identified. That's the bedrock of their security.
Makes sense. Pillar one, domestic supply.
Pillar two was securing another third through long-term purchase contracts with international uranium producers.
Buying from mines in other countries.
Yes, but crucially, these weren't just short-term deals. We're talking contracts locking in supply for 10, 20, even more years, often signed when prices were at their absolute lowest during the post-Fukushima slump. Incredible foresight to lock in those low prices for decades.
Okay. Domestic long-term contracts, what's the final third?
The final third, and perhaps the most strategically significant, was to come from direct investment in foreign uranium mines, actually buying stakes in mines, or even outright ownership in other countries.
So not just buying the product, but owning the means of production.
Exactly. It gives them direct control over extraction, production levels, and where that uranium goes. It's about embedding themselves in the global supply chain.
And where have they been doing this?
All over the place, really. They've made major investments and secured ownership stakes in mines in key uranium-rich countries. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are big ones. Canada as well. Namibia is particularly interesting with it. Chinese companies have significant ownership there, in some cases even 100% control of certain mines.
Wow.
Plus operations in places like Niger and significant stakes, maybe 50% in some cases, in mines in Australia too. Their footprint is truly global and strategically placed.
Okay, domestic, contracts, direct ownership, a very thorough strategy. How successful has it been? Have they secured what they need?
The numbers suggest it's been incredibly successful. Based on various analyses, it looks like China has effectively secured access to around 830,000 tons of uranium by 2050 through these combined efforts.
830,000 tons? That's getting close to the million tons they needed.
It is. Let's break it down roughly. About 400,000 tons of that comes from their foreign investments and exploration. That's Pillar 3 in action.
Okay.
Another roughly 200,000 tons comes from their recoverable domestic reserves, Pillar 1.
Right.
And the remaining 230,000 tons or so are locked in through those long-term purchase contracts they signed, Pillar 2.
So they've essentially pieced together most of what they projected they'd need.
Yeah, the general consensus among experts is that this 830,000 tons is likely sufficient, maybe even more than sufficient, to fuel their massive nuclear expansion plans out to 2050 or 2055.
They've basically secured their nuclear future, fuel-wise?
It certainly looks that way. Remember, their current consumption is around 11,000 tons a year, but that's set to jump to maybe 40,000 tons a year by 2040 as all these new reactors come online. They need the stockpile.
So this raises a huge question then. What does this mean for everyone else, for other countries that might be thinking about getting back into nuclear or expanding their fleets now?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? It fundamentally changes the playing field.
Yeah, which leads us to what feels like a pretty sobering point for, well, for the West mainly. This idea that they were sort of sleepwalking.
That's the term some analysts are using, yeah.
Yeah.
Sleepwalking through the last 15 years or so. While China was busy executing this incredibly detailed long-term uranium strategy, investing billions, signing deals, buying mines. Many Western nations were hitting pause.
Driven by those post-Fukushima concerns, maybe focusing more on renewables.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And look, there were understandable reasons for that: caution, safety worries, waste disposal issue, the high cost of building reactors. These are real concerns.
Sure.
But the consequence of that caution, that period of relative inaction on the nuclear fuel front, is now becoming really clear.
Because now they're looking at nuclear again.
Precisely. Suddenly, energy security is a massive issue due to geopolitics. Climate goals demand huge amounts of clean energy, and people are realizing you need reliable baseload power to back up intermittent renewables. So nuclear looks attractive again.
But they're waking up to find.
They're waking up to find the uranium market looks very different.
Huh.
China has quietly secured a huge portion of the long-term supply, often through those contracts signed years ago at bargain basement prices when nobody else was really interested.
So the cupboard is looking a bit bare for newcomers or those wanting to expand.
It's certainly tighter and more expensive. The warnings from industry experts are getting louder, that Western countries essentially missed the boat. They were asleep at the wheel, while China strategically positioned itself to dominate the future nuclear fuel market.
Which has huge implications for their own energy security and maybe even their geopolitical influence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It limits their options and potentially makes them more dependent, ironically, on the very global supply chains that China now has a much stronger grip on.
Okay, let's just try and synthesize this for a moment. We've covered this incredible scale of China's nuclear ambition: 150 new reactors, 400 gigawatts, needing 1 million tons of uranium, and this incredibly detailed, multi-part strategy to get that uranium over 2 decades. It's genuinely mind-blowing stuff.
It really is a case study in long-term strategic planning.
But it leaves us with this final nagging question. Is this massive push for nuclear power just about keeping the lights on for China's economy? Or is there something deeper going on?
I think that's the crucial question to ask at the end of this, and the evidence suggests it is deeper than just energy security.
How so?
Well, think about it. As we acknowledge, renewables like solar and wind are much more cost-effective today than they were when China started this nuclear push.
Yeah.
And China's a leader in renewables too, let's be clear.
Right, they install more solar and wind than anyone.
Exactly. Yet they continue this absolutely fervent, incredibly expensive pursuit of nuclear dominance. They haven't scaled back the nuclear ambition even as renewables have become cheaper for many applications.
So if it's not just about cheap electrons,
It strongly suggests the motivation goes beyond just kilowatts or even clean air. It points towards a calculated drive for technological dominance in the entire nuclear field.
dominance in the technology itself.
Yes. The nuclear industry involves incredibly complex engineering, high-value manufacturing, cutting-edge research into things like advanced reactors, small modular reactors, fuel recycling. It's a high-tech, high-profit strategic sector.
And they want to lead that sector globally.
That seems to be the goal. It's not just about using nuclear power. It's about mastering the technology, owning the intellectual property, setting the standards, and potentially becoming the world's leading exporter of nuclear reactors and services.
Like they've done in other tech sectors.
Potentially. And think about the timing. Many other countries are now likely to rush back towards nuclear energy for climate and security reasons. It's creating a new global race.
A race that China is already way ahead in.
Way ahead. Thanks to those 2 decades of quiet, strategic planning and investment, while others hesitated, they've positioned themselves perfectly to lead this next nuclear era.
Wow. That is a powerful thought to end on. It reframes the whole story, doesn't it? It's not just energy, it's geopolitics, it's technology, it's long-term influence.
It's a profound shift.
It really makes you think about what other long games might be playing out under the surface in other critical areas. Definitely something for you, the listener, to consider as we look at the future of global power and resources.